How do you repair the binding on an antique quilt? Have you ever wondered how to bring an antique quilt back to life? One of the most important aspects of quilt restoration is repairing the binding. The binding is that fabric strip that finishes the edges of the quilt. Over time, it can become worn or damaged. Let's look at how to repair it while keeping the quilt's value intact. First, take a close look at the binding. Check for fraying, tearing, or if it has come loose from the quilt. This assessment will help you decide if you can repair it in place, partially remove it, or if it needs a complete replacement. Next, you will need to choose a repair method. There are 3 main options. If the old binding is mostly intact but just worn, you can sew a new binding over it. If only certain sections are damaged, you can remove those parts and replace them. If the binding is too far gone, you will need to remove it completely and sew on a new one. If you decide to remove the old binding, do so carefully. Use sharp scissors or a seam ripper to cut the stitches without harming the quilt fabric underneath. Take your time with this step to avoid any accidental cuts. Now, it's time to prepare the new binding. Choose a fabric that matches the original in color and texture. This helps maintain the quilt's authenticity. Cut strips of fabric that are about 2 to 2.5 inches wide. Make sure they are long enough to go around the quilt edges with some overlap. To attach the new binding, fold the strips in half lengthwise and press them to create a crease. Align the raw edges of the binding with the quilt edges. Pin or clip them in place. Sew the binding onto the front edge of the quilt with a straight stitch, leaving a small seam allowance. Once you have sewn the binding on, fold it over to the back side of the quilt. Hand stitch it down using a slip stitch or blind stitch. This method keeps the finish neat and avoids bulky machine stitching on the back. If the quilt edges near the binding are fragile, reinforce them with small patches or careful mending before attaching the new binding. Use period-appropriate fabrics and hand-stitching techniques for historical accuracy. During the repair process, handle the quilt gently to prevent further damage. Avoid harsh chemicals or aggressive washing. If the quilt is very fragile or holds significant value, consider consulting a textile conservator for professional help. Repairing the binding on an antique quilt is a careful process. By following these steps, you can restore its function and appearance while preserving its collectible value. Each quilt has its own story, and your restoration efforts will help keep that story alive.